Chapter 31. It was night on the surface, and cloudy. It was visibility low. It took them a moment to get their bearings. Ben turned in a slow circle to get a sense of the surroundings, and he gasped. A mountain loomed ahead of them. Carved into the side of that mountain was a massive fortress. "Look at that," he said. "Oh, I'm looking," said Bobbie. "You realize it's built right over the zombie pit? Or maybe it's more of a zombie dungeon if it's in the basement of a castle." "Oh," she smiled. "Do you think whoever lives there is locking them up to keep people safe? Maybe they're determined to protect nearby villages, like a feudal lord." I love the optimism," said Ben. "There's something about the ominous stone effice looming high above us feels a little menacing to me." Johnny growled, and Ben was going to joke that it was a growl of agreement, but then he realized that Johnny was growling in a specific direction and pulling his sleeve. "What's up with the toothy toddler?" Ben asked. Bobbie shushed him. "There's somebody over there. I think they're watching us," she whispered. Ben squinted into the gloom. Bobbie was right. He could just make out a silhouette up ahead. "Hello, we come in peace," he called out. He called, and he held up his empty hands, casting a sidewise glance at Johnny, who continued to pull on his lead. He murmured, "Most of us." The figure made no reply. Bobbie tried next. "Do you, know anything about who lives there?" She lifted her hand to point at the fortress, and in doing so, she let Johnny's lead slip from her grasp. Johnny didn't hesitate for a moment. He ran forward, intent on attacking the stranger. Bobbie called for him to come back, her voice cracking with panic. Ben wasn't sure whenever she was more concerned that he'd eat somebody or that he'd get smacked around for trying. Either way, they both ran after him, determined to intercept him before he got within striking distance of the stranger, who remained eerily calm, standing the ground even as a pin-sized zombie bore down on them. Ben saw why as they drew closer. The figure wasn't a person at all. Someone had put a jack-o'-lantern on top of a hay bale, then affixed wood post to give the illusion of arms and legs. "It's a scarecrow?" said Bobbie. "It's a trap," said Ben. His warning came too late. The ground disappeared from beneath their feet, and Ben, Bobbie, and Johnny plunged a short distance into a bare stone room, dimly lit with a single lantern. A low growl sounded, and Ben said, "You can say that again, Johnny." "Ben," said Bobbie. "That wasn't Johnny." Ben scrabbled to his feet just as the creature lunged from the shadows. It was a zombie, a full-grown adult zombie, with grasping hands and open mouth. Ben was getting well and truly sick of zombies. And then, before Ben could blink, Johnny leaped forward, still free of his lead. The young zombie smashed into the older one, shoving it back before it could fall upon Ben. All right, brother, good save, said Bobbie, and she closed the distance with her sword. She slashed at the hostile mob, stepping back whenever it swiped at her. Johnny tugged at its legs, hampering its movement, and Bobbie was able to destroy it without taking a single hit. Ben had watched the entire scene without once having to lift his own sword. You two definitely have the hang of that. Johnny sniffed at the rotten flesh left behind by the fallen zombie, as if considering its suitability for eating, but he stuck out his tongue and turned away from it in disgust. They're not so tough, Bobbie said, when there's only one of them. But hundreds of zombies? Ben felt a thrill of dread just remembering what looked below. You think this leads down to that dungeon? He asked, noting a single downward sloping exit from the hole. It must, Bobbie said. Zombies fall through the trap and they end up in a pit. I'll bet there are a lot of these traps all over this area. I'll bet you're right, said Ben. He bit his lip. I should have recognized it for a trap right away. I fell for something similar back when Logan was training me. Only that trap was only that trap was way worse than a hole in the ground. He gazed up at the night sky. We can dig or climb right out of here. But if it had been filled with cobwebs, he shuddered. Cobwebs? Bobbie asked. What's so bad about cobwebs? We were able to hack our way out of the ones we stepped in back in Savannah Town. Webs are like zombies. They'll find one at a time, Ben said, and when you're on your feet, he leaned against the dirt wall, but fall into a stack of cobwebs, and the practically inescapable. Inescapable. Fallen doesn't feel like the right word because you're moving so slowly, but you're totally helpless. You're stuck, just drifting. I don't understand how this was part of your training, Bobbie said. Logan wanted to make a point, Ben explained. I was a noob, making all kinds of stupid mistakes, and those mistakes put him at risk. So he wanted to prove a point. Ben sighed. He set the trap, and I fell for it. It was this endless chasm of webs in the dark. It felt like I was trapped there forever, and then the darkness started to recede, and I realized I was falling right into a pit of lava. Ben shuddered. Every second I was in the web, I slipped closer to the lava. I couldn't find any way out of it. I couldn't do anything except scream for help over and over again. Bobbie put her hands to her mouth. Ben, that's awful. How cruel. Ben shook his head. Logan was just making a point. He wouldn't have let anything happen to me. He waited until the last minute, and then he stepped in and saved me. All it took was a couple of blocks of dirt placed over the lava, and I landed harmlessly on the ground. I still think it was cruel. Maybe, Ben shrugged, but I learned my lesson. It made me a better hero. You've made me a better hero, said Bobbie. You've taught me a lot, and you never resorted to skill tactics or power trips to do it. You didn't have to make me feel helpless in order to inspire me. She frowned. I know it's none of my business, she said, but this Logan person sounds like a lousy teacher, a terrible friend, and a rotten human being. I guess I didn't have anything to compare him with, Ben said sadly. Not on the friend front, anyway. You do, you do now, said Bobbie, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. Johnny tried to bite his other shoulder, but his teeth clacked harmlessly on the iron armor, and Ben assumed the gesture was meant with affection. Then Bobbie's hand suddenly squeezed. Ben, she said, do you know what this means? What, what means? The story you just told me. That's why you're so afraid of spiders. Her eyes went wide. You associate spiders with webs, and webs with a traumatic experience that made you feel helpless and scared. Ben thought about that. Yeah, you might have a point, he said. On the other hand, he added, shuddering, it could be the beady little eyes. Bobbie opened her mouth to say something, but she suddenly stopped. Gripping Ben's shoulder more fiercely, she suddenly shoved him back, knocking him prone. What was that for? He cried, but then he saw the arrow protruding from the wall. Bobbie and Bobbie had shoved him out of its path just in time. I wouldn't move if I was you, said a voice from on high. Ben didn't move except to look up. Two figures loomed above, peering over the edge of the trap door. One of them was reloading his crossbow. The other brandished a diamond axe and a sneer. Ben recognized them even in the low light. Flip and Hatchet. What are you doing in our trap? Said Hatchet. Her eyes darted to the rotten flesh on the ground. Did you destroy one of our zombies? The boss isn't gonna like that, said Flip, bouncing on his feet. What's your boss want with zombies? Ben asked. Why are you so nosy? Asked Flip, and he took aim. Ben put up his hands. Not nosy, call it professional curiosity. Professional? Echoed Hatchet. Sure, said Ben. You say your boss wants zombies? Ben pulled gently on the lead, and Johnny stepped out from the shadows. Well, we've got a zombie right here. Chapter 32. Whatever Ben was up to, Bobbie hated it. Hated it. Every big sister instinct that she had was ringing with alarm. She didn't like these two heavily armed strangers. She didn't like using Johnny as a bargaining chip to meet their boss, and she didn't like the look of the fortress as they approached. Ben had been right. It was far too imposing to be inviting. Are those heads? Bobbie asked, aghast at the sight of a pair of zombie heads sitting on a post. Welcome to Fort Rot, said Flip. Hatchet chuckled. Chop, chop, she said. Don't fall behind now. Bobbie turned to Ben. This was a bad idea, she whispered. He whispered back. Don't you trust me? Bobbie gave him a long, hard look. I mean, sure, she answered. Wow, said Ben. You really had to think about that for a minute, didn't you? Bobbie scoffed and turned away. Trust was an easy word to throw around, but with her brother's safety at stake, she'd be keeping both eyes open. The fortress was carved from the very mountain. It looked solid and imposing, but also very plain. There were no turrets or arched windows, and the entire structure was a dull, monotonous gray. The only exception was a large hanging banner. It was red and emblazoned upon it was the image of a fearsome black skull with two crossed bones. Ben seemed to recognize it, but he didn't say anything about it. As they ascended the stone staircase, Bobbie saw that the wooden portcullis remained closed to them. Hey, it's us, said Flip, and he banged against the gate. Open up. He better not have wandered off, grumbled Hatchet. I'm here, piped a voice from beyond the portcullis. 1 second. The portcullis lifted, and the hatchet dunked underneath it as soon as it was open. Flip waved Bobbie and the others in ahead of him. They entered into a sort of courtyard. It was a utilitarian space, bulky and unadorned, with all manner of workstations ringing its perimeter. There was a crafting table, a furnace, an anvil, and more. To Bobbie, it looked like someone had taken an entire village, removed everything of warmth and beauty, and shoved what was left into the single room. Seeing someone new, Johnny tried to pull away, but Bobbie had a tight grip on his lead. Although outside Johnny's reach, the boy who had been standing at the portcullis controls took a few steps back. This is unusual, said the boy. He was smaller than the other two, younger, and with simple leather armor and no visible weapons. Zombies aren't supposed to come through this way. That's what the tunnels are for. Hatchet twisted the boy's helmet around, covering his eyes. We know what the tunnels are used for, you nerd. We dug 'em, didn't we? The boy painstakingly realigned his helmet. Then, then why? He's a special zombie, Ben said lightly. Does all sorts of tricks. I'm guessing you're not the boss. Flip chortled. That'll be the day. He's on the observation balcony, said the boy. Should I take them? We'll take them, said Hatchet. You take this. And she handed over a small sack of loot. It's slim pickings out there. I see why the boss wants to move on soon. Bobbie caught Ben's eye. These had to be the people who had been gathering up every available resource. And that meant they had to have gold. But would they part with it? Somehow she doubted it. The boy pressed a button, and as the portcullis dropped back into place, he pointed to a nearby chest. Don't forget. We won't forget, said Hatchet, clearly annoyed. She stomped over to the chest, opened it aggressively, and placed her diamond axe inside it. Flip did the same with his crossbow, and then gestured to Ben and Bobbie. We'll hold on to ours, if that's okay, said Ben. Hatchet gave him a dirty look. That's not okay, she said. Point of admission to see the boss, said Flip. Bobbie felt a tingle of anxiety. She didn't like the idea of being defenseless among all these strangers. Maybe we ought to meet your boss another time, she suggested. Find neutral territory somewhere. Out there, said Hatchet. It's all Ravager territory, as far as the eye can see. And we are the Ravagers, said Flip. That means you're either our guest or you trespassers. He glowered at them. Guests leave the weapons here temporarily. Trespassers have the stuff permanently confiscated. Guess it is, Ben said happily, and he dropped his bow and sword into the open chest. Bobbie glared at him as she did the same. Trust me, he mouthed, and she resisted a sudden urge to stomp on his foot. With those iron swords, Hatchet chortled, you might as well have held on to them. You'd have a hard time cutting wheat with those things. Yeah, well, Bobbie said annoyed. Resources have been hard to come by out there. See what I say, Hatchet said, turning back to the young gatekeeper. Slim pickings, leaving the boy to catalog and organize the loot. Hatchet and Flip led Bobbie and the others up a long, winding staircase. There were basic there were basic windows, just empty spaces, really, looking out onto the overworld. But it was too dark outside for Bobbie to see much. Inside, an abundance of torches illuminated every corner. Johnny grumbled and swiped at more than one burning torch as they passed. They didn't take the staircase all the way to the top. Instead, exiting out into a stony hallway lined with doors. "Are these the living quarters?" asked Bobbie, and she was met with stony silence. Ben leaned over and whispered, "Nice place, but the toad leaves something to be desired." A second spiral staircase led down. This one seemed to be an interior space, perhaps going right through the center of the fortress. There were no windows either in the staircase or the hallway to which it led. This hallway ended in an open arched doorway. The guides, captors paused before it. "I'll wait here and keep an eye on them," said Hatchet. "You fill him in," Flip scoffed. "I'll wait here while you fill him in." A moment of silent tension passed between them. Bobbie half expected them to settle the matter with a fist fight. Was this why they were expected to leave the weapons at the door? In the end, Bobbie couldn't say what precisely had passed between them during the steering contest, and only that the impasse was settled. Flip broke eye contact, grumbled, "Fine," and stormed through the archway. Ben winked at Bobbie. She could almost hear him thinking, "Watch this." He settled up next to Hatchet and said, "You shouldn't let him push you around like that, especially in front of, guests." Hatchet gave him a dirty look. "Mind your own business," she said, and Ben held up his hands in exaggerated surrender. Throughout all of this, Bobbie kept her brother close, with both hands gripped tight on his lead. He watched the strangers with interest, and she feared that if he slipped her grasp again, he would attack. She wasn't certain, but however, his interest might have been mindless hunger, but she thought there was something else in his eyes. Something like the curiosity he used to show around others before he was transformed. He was still in there, somewhere. She was only more convinced as time went on. Flip returned and gestured for them to enter. Bobbie let Ben go ahead of her so that she could keep Johnny between them. She gasped at the crossed out of the hallway and onto the balcony. It didn't overlook the exterior of the castle, as Bobbie had expected. The boy had called it the observation balcony after all. But this balcony overlooked the zombie pit. From this vantage, the sheer number of undead was even more overwhelming to contemplate. She could scarce secretly see the ground past the crust of shambling green bodies. Anyone who fell into the pit would land right on top of a zombie. Anyone who fired an arrow below would be certain to hit one. That's what the boss was doing, firing arrows indiscriminately into the crowd. Bobbie watched as one arrow launched into a zombie shoulder. The mob, confused and enraged, lashed out at empty air, unable to understand where the attack had come from. Bobbie had no love for zombies, but toying with them like this seems cruel. She would have expected nothing less from the boy on the balcony. However, she recognized his face as easily as she recognized his cruel laughter. It was the stranger who had come to Plaintown, the one who had set the hard oak aflame. What was he doing here? How had he gathered all of these zombies? And why was he embracing Ben like an old friend. Ben! He cried, drawing the other boy close. Wow, I never thought I'd see you again. Same here, said Ben. What's new, Logan? Chapter 33. Logan? Said Bobbie, and she stepped forward, putting herself between her brother and the other boys. This is Logan? The stranger, Logan, grinned. I'm guessing Ben here hadn't had nice things to say about me, but I'm glad to see him again, and it's nice to meet you. So, you don't remember me? She said. Seriously? You set my village on fire, Logan chuckled. You have to be more specific, Treat, he said, elbowing Ben. Ben said weakly. Bobbie didn't do it on purpose. She didn't mean to lose her grip on Johnny's lead, but as she felt it slipping from her grasp, she didn't react as quickly as she could have. In an instant, Johnny had pushed past her to lunge at Logan. The boy shrieked, drawing back, and to Bobbie's astonishment, pulling Ben in front of himself like a shield. Ben put his hands out like an attempt to mollify Johnny. Hey, buddy, he said. It's all right. As Johnny approached, Ben eased his hands into Johnny's shoulders, and Bobbie's brother calmed down. There, that's it. Logan isn't for eating. Ben took up the lead and handed it over to Bobbie. Drop something? He asked, and his eyes were accusing. Thanks, Bobbie said, accepting the lead and unvoiced but heavily implied scolding. Ben was right. That had been dangerously irresponsible. If Logan had gone for a weapon instead of retreating. How did you do that? Asked Logan. He crept forward. Johnny growled, and Logan stayed where he was. Did you actually train a zombie? He asked, all in his voice. None of your business, said Bobbie. At the same time that Ben said, we'll tell you all about it. Ben and Bobbie traded glares. We have some questions for you, actually, Bobbie said to Logan. All right, that's fair, Logan shrugged. Why don't you two join me for dinner? We'll make it a game. We'll make a game of it. He grinned. And answer for an answer. We'll take turns. The dining hall was an unadorned space, devoid of color and comfort. There were lanterns for light and furnaces for cooking, and dark windows that likely provided an expansive view of the surrounding landscape during daylight hours. Less for aesthetic enjoyment, Bobbie imagined that than for defensive purposes. Everywhere she looked, she was reminded that this was not a home, but a fortress. So, who was Logan at war with? You almost got me, said Logan. The old wither rose in the treasure chest trek. He shook his head and chuckled. I should have seen it coming. Well, you wouldn't have had any trouble if you hadn't robbed me while I was sleeping, Ben said. Ben said, apparently failing to see the humor in any of it. Logan chuckled again. Guilty as charged. But be honest. Are you mad that I took off with your stuff, or are you mad that I did it to you before you could do it to me? The first one, Ben said heartily. Why would I even think of doing that to you? We were partners. That was the whole issue, said Logan. This world's not made for partners. Ben, with so much wealth up for grabs, well, somebody's got to grab it eventually. Problem with the stake? Bobbie realized bitterly that the question had been directed at her. Huh? She said, looking up from the table. Your steak. You haven't touched it, said Logan. Is that your first question? Bobbie asked, and he chortled. Clever, said Logan. But no, I don't actually care. Eat the steak or don't. I promise it isn't zombie meat, though, if that's what you're thinking. They're too valuable for that. Bobbie's eyes flitted up to Johnny, who stood across the room where she could keep him in view. She didn't like the idea that her brother had value to this creep. While it might keep Johnny safer from destruction than he otherwise be, it was all too obvious to Bobbie that Logan was a person willing to steal anything of value he could get his hands on. And he was a very good boss either. When Hatch and Flip had shown up for dinner, Logan had chased them off, telling them to fend for themselves tonight. Neither of the mercenaries had liked that. Hatchet had glared at Bobbie as if she purposely stolen her place, but they hadn't argued, instead skulking off into the fortress interior. The other boy, the younger one, had been in charge of cooking. He had flitted from one furnace to another, attempting to prepare all three steaks simultaneously. Bobbie had expected he prepare all three steaks. Bobbie had expected he then make a fourth meal for himself. Then make Instead, he had immediately begun baking the dessert. He stood at a furnace now, keeping well clear of Johnny's range. "I will let you two have the first question," Logan said, "since you're guests and all." Bobbie knew precisely what she wanted to ask. She opened her mouth to speak, but Ben blurted out, "What did you do with all my stuff?" Bobbie looked at him aghast. Was that really what they needed to learn? Logan crossed his arms. "You know, I had a feeling you want it all back. I had my squire gather it up." "Squire?" said Ben. "Sure, squire. Sure, squire, quartermaster, gatekeeper, cook. Ben does a little bit of everything around here." At first, Bobbie thought that Logan had gotten their names mixed up, but then the boy at the front turned around and waved. "Hi," he said. "I probably should have introduced myself before. I'm Ben." Ben gasped like a fish. Finally, he said, "You're not Ben. I'm Ben." The boy, also Ben, other Ben, shrunk a little and said, "Sorry." Bobbie rolled her eyes. "You don't have to apologize to him," she said firmly. But Ben's focus wasn't entirely on Logan. "You replaced me with another Ben?" Logan cackled, clearly amused to no end by this. Bobbie couldn't help but think that Ben's emotional reaction was feeding Logan's desire to push buttons. Logan liked to see people squirm, didn't he? "All right, look," said Logan. "I made a mistake. Is that what you want to hear? I thought I'd be better off alone, but I was wrong. Besides, being alone out there is so much work." He leaned back in his chair. "When I came across Hash and Flip fumbling around like a couple of lost, directionless kids, I figured out the solution. Not a partnership, but a gang with a clear history. We recruited Ben too a little bit after that, promised to train him, toughen him up in exchange for his services. If Ben too objected to the new nickname, he didn't voice it. He just pointed to a chest across the room and said, "I'll put all the items you asked for in that chest, sir," then turned back to his furnace. "Go ahead, Ben 1," Logan said. Your stuff's right over there." Ben 1 gave Logan a long look as if suspecting some trick, and when he stood and walked over to the chest, he made a show of checking for traps. Finally, content that the chest was safe, he opened the lid and started sorting through the contents. "My arrows," he said, "and my pickaxe, and It's here! Leaping to his feet, Ben held a gleaming diamond sword up to the sky, striking a pose like an action hero. Arthur Parks, he cried. Scourge of spiders, smiter of silverfish. Bobbie was anxious, impatient, and genuinely annoyed, but she still found herself smiling at the sight of Ben's joy. Then her eyes cut to Logan, and she noticed how intently he was watching not just Ben, but Johnny too. How'd you train him? Asked Logan, the zombie boy. So that's why he had Ben's things ready for him. He wanted to he wanted a chance to absorb what would happen when Ben got too close to Johnny. Bobbie had no interest in telling Logan anything, but Ben pressed her. It's only fair to enter him, Ben said, and he handed her a diamond pickaxe. I mean, look at that. Quality craftsmanship, he winked. Keep it. I've got all these cool arrows too. One that makes you invisible. One that lets you breathe underwater. Not now, Ben, Bobbie said, and she turned to face Logan. To answer your question, I trained him by treating him like a human being, with love and respect, and a lot of patience. She frowned. I sort of doubt you'd be any good at that. Ouch, said Logan. You'll still shout about that old tree? He pinned her with his gaze. Or did something else happen to your presence in the village after I left? It's your turn to answer a question, said Bobbie. Happy to, Logan said lightly, but let's move this to the roof. You've got to see the view. He smiled. It's positively killer.